Hello everyone, my name's Anne McKenna. I'm a humanities publisher in the secondary division at Oxford, and I'm the publisher of the new edition of Oxford Inside History for New South Wales. Before we start, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Thank you all for joining us today. At the start of this year, we had intended to run face-to-face workshops in Term 3, but given the uncertainty of the times, that wasn't to be. So these workshops have now become their webinars, and it's fantastic that so many of you have tuned in today. We are fairly new to webinar hosting at Oxford, so I just ask that you be patient if we have any technical hiccups. So just to run through our agenda, first up, one of our inside authors, Bernie Howard, will talk about the process of writing a new edition in this challenging year, then take you through our new and updated content and how we can help students succeed in history right through to Year 12. Then our New South Wales Secondary Sales Manager, Kelly James, will give you an overview of the features of the new edition and the digital platform. After that, we'll have time for some questions. By default, your microphones are muted, so if you could please post any questions in the Q&A section on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll get to them at the end. I'm now going to hand over to Bernie. Bernie is a former history teacher and head teacher, a long-standing Oxford history author, and a past president of the History Teachers Association of New South Wales. He's worked on syllabus development for the New South Wales Board of Studies and ACARA. Over to you, Bernie.
Thanks, Anne, and welcome to everybody from sunshiny Kincumber, where the sun is setting, and it did look a bit like that slide for a while when I started writing. I think we talked a lot about what would be valuable today, and to help you understand what's in a new edition of a history book, I thought it was worth taking a little while to just talk about how we went about writing and creating this new edition. And the first thing I always start with is a syllabus check, and that was in December and going into January. And at that stage, I couldn't go outside. Windows are closed. Smoke and bushfires are all around us, and it became very clear very quickly that this was an extraordinary time to be writing. And in December and January I thought, well, I'm going to have to update the environment chapter for starters, because this summer of bushfires is starting to shape the way we talk about the environment, the way we think about the environment. And for the first couple of months my attention was, well, how do I do something that recognises what's happening with bushfires in 2020? Little did I know what else was ahead in 2020. And lo and behold, by the time you get down to serious writing and you're starting to work through chapters, starting to pull case studies together and thinking about what you want to say, couldn't go outside then either. We'd now moved into lockdown. And the COVID-19 pandemic had rapidly become part of our history, and you could see straight away it was becoming a reference point for every student we taught. Just as in my own life, I sort of look back and think about, well, the Vietnam War was a defining moment. The sacking of Whitlam was a defining moment. And that for these students, the bushfires for many of them would be a defining moment. Then rolling straight on top of that became this pandemic that has changed lives completely. And so trying to write in this situation, you're really thinking about how do we incorporate this understanding of a new context for what the work will be read in. And by the time our lockdown was over and I could start tentatively putting a few feet aside, going through editing manuscripts, and George Floyd is killed on the 25th of May, and those shock waves reverberated around the world and certainly gave us something else to think about. Here was another layer of complexity in the context that anything we wrote would be received in. And that became a really important thing to think about, because suddenly hashtag Black Lives Matter could not be ignored either. yet the books were basically written. So that whole process of writing over the past 8 months or so has been with the constant awareness that the books will be coming out in a very new context for studying history, and one that had to be in some way recognised. And so I think it's important, I wanted to make it really clear that we were never trying to write a history of 2020. That would be inappropriate, it would be impossible. That'll be another time and place, but that didn't change the fact that the context of 2020 would be hanging over any book that comes out. So, the conclusion we came to, that not including those key events such as the bushfires, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, in a history book we were putting out, would be like doing a Basil Fawlty and not mentioning the war if you're writing a book in 1943 or 44. Because I think every history student has the right to say, can't the history help us make sense of the world? Doesn't it mean something? Doesn't it help us know what's happening? And I think that's a very valid question. Certainly kids I've spoken to, you get that sense that they're hoping that history can provide them with something solid and understanding that helps them find their place in the world that's emerging post-2020. So that was really what we were trying to do. So one of the goals had to be some acknowledgement of these extraordinary events that we've been living through, and to place them in some sort of historical context where appropriate that would help students make sense of a year that will be a reference point. We know that their kids and their grandkids will be constantly coming up to them as oral history and asking them from history assignments, what was it like to live in 2020? That must have been amazing. How did you get through it? What did you do? And so that's part of what will feed through in what we're trying to do. What has always been paramount in the Inside History books, I think, is trying to make history enjoyable and stimulating in the classroom. You want something that gives students and teachers the opportunity to enjoy the hour or so they're together and feel that they're doing something of value and worthwhile, but enjoying it while they do it. And also, as I'll get to in a moment, this idea that history now is a continuum across 7 to 12, and what really, I guess, there's a coherence now in the writing from 7 to 12 as we try and take students through the steps of building the appropriate knowledge, skills and understanding that ultimately will lead to HSC success. And so that coherence in approach is, I think, also something we're really trying very hard to run through from 7 to 12. And so I want to be clear that we've never tried to just gratuitously throw in a few 2020 dates and say, yeah, we've covered 2020. We can't obviously do 2020 in any detail or depth. It's impossible to do something while it's still unfolding around you. But it has changed the context, so we've tried to do more than just mention a few dates. And the other key thing, obviously, when you're writing a new edition of a book, is to make sure that new scholarship and ideas are constantly informing the way we view the content of the syllabuses. And I think that particularly in Year 9 is absolutely crucial. And we've tried to take the steps in opening students up to new scholarship and ideas that are circulating through history at the moment. So we've tried to integrate that into key areas. Now, this is not an exclusive list, but areas where you'll probably see, and I'll discuss them now, Year 7, Investigating the Ancient Past, Year 8, The Black Death, Year 9, The Industrial Revolution, Progressive Ideas, Making a Nation, Year 10, rights and freedoms, popular culture and the environment movement are areas where there's been particular emphasis in new scholarship and new ideas and integrating the context of 2020. Now, the first one I want to sort of talk about is a section that was added, and here I don't want to embarrass it, but I'm going to acknowledge every book needs a good publisher. And it was Anne McKenna, our publisher, that found the Budj Bim cultural landscape being added to the World Heritage List. And it just made perfect sense. And to be honest, I think it's one of the most important changes in the new edition. And that's part of the Investigating the Ancient Past section. And if you weren't aware that that UNESCO had added this Victorian site to the World Heritage List, I just want to read a couple of things from the UNESCO listing. They talk about the Budj Bim cultural landscape in the traditional country of the Gunditjmara people in southeastern Australia, consisting of 3 serial components containing one of the world's most extensive and oldest aquaculture systems. It talks about a highly productive aquaculture system provided an economic and social base for Gunditjmara society for 6 millennia. Over a period of at least 6,600 years, they created, manipulated and modified these local hydrological regimes and ecological systems that bears exceptional testimony to the cultural traditions, knowledge, practices and ingenuity of the Gunditjmara. It bears testimony to the Gunditjmara as engineers and kuyang fishers. And Gunditjmara knowledges and practices have endured and continue to be passed down through their elders and are recognisable across the wetlands of the Budj Bim cultural landscape. Now, just think for a moment on the significance of those words in terms of understanding Australian history. When they hit Year 9 and hit Terra Nullius and think, well, hang on, but this was an empty land. When you look at the way history's been taught in this country for well over 100 years, of not acknowledging what Indigenous Australians were capable of, how they passed on knowledge, which is their history. And when you think about the context of Black Lives Matter and people saying, well, they just don't acknowledge us, they don't know what we're capable of. And here, is a global organisation recognising just what Indigenous Australians were capable of. And we'll pick this up a little bit more. This is a lot building on the work of Bill Gammage and Bruce Pascoe, who are challenging a lot of what have been the accepted norms. And by dealing with a question like this in Year 7, students of all levels of ability can understand the contestability of history and understand that we learn more about our past all the time, and we need to be adjusting our sources and our understandings. So I actually think that edition is probably, arguably the most important in the whole series of books in what it sets up for students to be able to understand and do and build their skill base. This was a fairly easy and obvious one. Despite all the protests and the Karens out there, it's okay to wear masks, and we've been wearing masks through pandemics for a very long time. There's obviously been a lot of references to the end of World War I and the Spanish flu, but as we can see with the illustration there, the wearing of masks during a pandemic certainly goes back to medieval times, and those connections will obviously be a key element. The Black Death taught in 2020 and beyond will have a very different context from the way it's been previously taught, I think. Now, in Making a Nation, in Year 9, it's become critical to recognise that there is a huge body of evidence and scholarship now re-examining the notion of terra nullius. And, I've mentioned it with the Year 7 work, Bill Gammage and Bruce Pascoe's work in challenging that idea of an empty land. And one of the illustrations we've taken from Dark Emu is this evidence of the grain belt that, and if you can see it on the slide there, the dark is the current Australian grain belt where, colonial Australians have grown grain, and the dotted lines show how far it extends, where grain was grown by Indigenous Australians. And even just that, the discussions that can be had around an illustration like that, I think are so critical for developing, our junior students to be inquiring learners who can think for themselves, which translates obviously into senior success further down the track. And we need to be considering Indigenous land management. The fact that one of the discussions that came out of the bushfires was the way that cultural burning by Indigenous Australians prepared land for these sort of fires and managed land much more efficiently than the way our current, burning regimes work. So making a nation becomes, I think, a really important chapter in terms of having students realise that history is a vibrant, living, changing subject. It's not something that's just stuck, and you don't need to write a new edition of a book because nothing changes. They need to understand that, hang on, everything can change in an instant as they're living through. Now, one of the other debates this year, and you hear of, it seems every day you turn on the media, you're getting something else you feel's got to be added in, was when, Scott Morrison came out and said there's never been slavery in Australia, and was absolutely deluged in the backlash where people had obviously been taught some history and challenged that simplistic view. And I thought, well, I'm glad that I've done a case study on Mal Meninga and his search to understand his South Sea Islander ancestry, because I think, the case study there is one I'll talk about in the next webinar next week, where I'll unpack the case studies in a little bit more detail. But, we look at how Mal Meninga searched for his South Sea Islander ancestry, and that brings up the whole question of slavery in Australia, and that was there before Scott Morrison decided to do a promo for us, bless his heart. Now, in Progressive Ideas and Movements, we do a case study on capitalism, and, I pulled out a case study. I decided to do a case study on the idea of whether we're seeing the end of capitalism, because Paul Mason, British journalist, had done a book in 2015 that suggested we were moving into a period of post-capitalism, and that was being accelerated by external shocks. And I think it's fairly obvious we're living through an external shock at the moment. And any kid that's doing progressive ideas and movements as their topic will be aware of what's happening around them. And so I thought they need a case study that can challenge their perceptions and can help them understand the discussions they're hearing. So hence the Are We Seeing the End of Capitalism case study for Progressive Ideas and Movements, which sort of zeroes into the Zeitgeist, I guess. And rights and freedoms, obviously, we managed to get Black Lives Matter onto the timeline, because I think it's by featuring it there, it gives you the chance as teachers to discuss in the classroom the implications. And in the previous edition, we'd used Chris Lilly as an example of an Australian cultural exporter whose work had been taken around the world. And then in an instant, his work's taken off Netflix because, his blackface and brownface aren't regarded as appropriate. And so there's been a reappraisal of his work, and that needs to be discussed. And, certainly students need to be able to develop an opinion on the appropriateness of, should Netflix have taken his work off? Are brownface and blackface appropriate in, the new context that we're living in? And when you think that as the last edition of Insight came out, we were just logging onto Netflix, how quickly our access has changed in that time. And that TV screen there, I think, shows there are things there that just weren't around when the last edition came out. That's how quickly our access to popular culture has changed. And the environment movement was a challenging one. The bushfires had affected most of the state, and yet already, they seem to have been moved. We've moved on into a new drama. It will become another reference point for so many students, and I can't think that they could pick up a book looking at the environment movement and not expect to see some discussion of that summer that they went through. And so even just that image that now opens the environment chapter, I think is a stunning image of last summer and captures everything that many students would have gone through. And even the environmental implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. China's carbon emissions dropped by 25% in the first couple of weeks of their lockdown. And that's a dramatic impact. And that then rippled around the world, and you saw, news footage of clean air. And it made me reflect on just how much we must be putting into the environment on a daily basis when you suddenly stop most traffic, you stop most production, and suddenly the air clears. And so I think students can see hope in that. And I really believe that history can give students hope at a time when hope sometimes seems in short supply, and from where they're looking, everything seems so grim. But that brief start of the pandemic showed, hang on, human beings can make a difference. And here in the environment case study is, that conflict in a nutshell. I looked at the Davos 2020 conference in January, where Greta Thunberg and Donald Trump spoke virtually one after the other. And, Greta Thunberg's 17, Trump is 73, and they represent such total opposites in how we deal with our environment and where our future lies. And I thought that case study really captures everything about what kids are thinking. Greta Thunberg took a one-person school strike against politicians in action on climate and turned it into a 4 million global movement, and ended up as Times Person of the Year last year, much to Donald Trump's chagrin. And you just look at the two quotes. Thunberg, no political ideology of economic structure has been able to tackle the climate and environmental emergency and create a cohesive and sustainable world. And, Trump had laid out his platform that this is not a time for pessimism, this is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process, because this is a time for tremendous hope and joy and optimism and action. And Greta Thunberg came back, because remember, this was January this year, and said, in case you haven't realised, the world is on fire. And in that exchange, there's the environment movement. So that case study became, I thought, a wonderful opportunity for kids to analyse the two sides. I've been looking at society and culture, personal interest projects, and the number of kids that are looking in some way at people power and global movements and the political inaction on climate. It's quite stunning. So obviously this is an issue that they're really thinking about and dealing with all the time. And as I was working through the environment chapter, I thought this, has become a really crucial chapter. And although I hate to admit it, if I was programming tomorrow, I might not even do popular culture. I might do the environment movement. I think it's that important, and it's something I think that kids are really concerned about because it is their future. And I think that there is now a possibility that they can feel they can influence the future. And so I think that becomes a very powerful chapter. So how do we help our students succeed in history? And I just pulled some comments out from the modern history exam comments from last year's HSC, which was the first with the new syllabus. And if you read through those comments, they're really telling a very clear story. Now, they talk about things like just don't give a narrative, just don't tell what happened. Make explicit reference where a source has been used, so learn how to use sources. Use specific detail to support their response. In other words, have students, when they have an opinion, have the evidence to back it up. Make clear and direct links, so be able to see things like cause and effect, continuity and change. Focus on answering the question, not just writing everything they know related to the content point. And that what I think's come through very clearly with what they're expecting in Year 12 is that the age of rote learning is over, and that we really have to be teaching students to think for themselves from Year 7 right through. If we don't do that, they're not going to be successful senior history students. Whereas if we do that, they will arrive in Year 11 and 12 with a skill set in place, able to be developed and taken through to that higher level, which will enable them to build on their understanding of the historical concepts and skills that they've been working on now quite effectively and intensively for 4 years, because it underpins everything they do. And there are those skills and concepts, and you can see there's a clear link between stages 4 and 5 and stage 6. There's an obvious and clear continuum, and certainly when we did things like key features, and I know Tony, when she did antiquity, did the same thing, we were presuming that students were able to do those things and give them opportunities to perfect their understanding and ability to deliver on those skills and concepts. And so as we put 7 to 10 insight together, there was an expectation that students will be constantly building on those skills and concepts and building their understanding. That's become, I think, a really strong focus in the new editions. And so the way we're doing these, little things like spotlights, so that students can understand when they come across, I know we haven't done every time you mention a concept or a skill, it would be, they'd clog up the book, but so that students are able to see skills and concepts in the context as they work through something. So they're seeing something, they're learning to recognise, such as this example here with the Gwen rock paintings. Just a simple pointing out about contestability as you work through this in class, that they've been interpreted in different ways by historians, even though they're examining the same evidence. And if that becomes part of the way they look at something, and they learn to recognise that contestability in Year 7, and that's not a difficult way to do it in a task like this, then they're developing that, and we build on that across all 4 editions. So that in Year 8, here's looking at the Black Death and perspectives. Religious beliefs were significant in shaping the outlook of people in medieval Europe. While today the Black Death is viewed as a medical situation, the perspective at the time was that it was a punishment from God for sinful ways. And you may want to compare think about different perspectives about the COVID-19 pandemic. And then you can bring in continuity and change. So as you unpack these, you can bring it back to what they're living through in 2020 and help them stitch it together by building on their conceptual understanding. And I'm a real believer that that's accessible to all students. And if we're able to do that, we're really giving those students every opportunity to succeed in our subject. And obviously it's a subject we love. We wouldn't be here on a Tuesday afternoon if you didn't feel passionately about history and teaching history. So as a Year 9 example, looking at where did Europeans settle in Australia and what were the effects of contact with Indigenous peoples. The little highlight there is the work of Indigenous Australian author Bruce Pascoe, particularly with his 2014 book Dark Emu, has also helped reveal the complexity of the colonial view of Indigenous Australia. By examining the accounts of the early white explorers, Dark Emu uncovers clear evidence of the highly developed agricultural practices of Indigenous peoples in Australia. The ignoring of Indigenous achievement to justify the fiction of terra nullius is set to become a highly contested aspect of 21st century Australian history. And that's an argument that will continue to bubble under. You can give it titles like history wars or culture wars, but it's about recognising what has happened in Australia's past and using evidence and looking at sources to challenge what has previously been believed. And in doing that, students are learning to become very good history students and developing the skills base to succeed at every level. And also learning what is context, why is it important? And, I've used here looking at significance, how it's crucial to consider historical context when you're making decisions about whether something is significant or why it's significant. In 1956, it would have been difficult for an historian to see the introduction of rock and roll and television to Australia as significant. By the 21st century, the historical significance of both was clear. Because, in 1956, we only just got TV. It was out of the reach of ordinary people, and rock and roll was supposed to be dead and buried by the end of the 50s. Yet both are still here. Both have changed and evolved and have made an enormous contribution to global popular culture, but also Australian popular culture. And in both those fields, they have then exported Australian popular culture overseas. So, significance isn't bestowed on something, and they need to understand that context to see how it emerges from an understanding of history and of context. Just a couple of examples from key features 1 and 2 to show where the skills and development we've worked with them up to year 10 take them in year 11 and 12. Now, in looking at key features, we did a thing on Australia Day and the discussion around Australia Day, and there's a quote there from Adam Briggs: we have to make ourselves uncomfortable because to be able to make everyone else uncomfortable to initiate change, because if we're all comfortable, nothing is going to change. Now that's a deep and profound thought when students have spent 4 years developing a deep understanding of continuity and change. And so those students will arrive in year 11 absolutely prepared to discuss those key issues. And to be the sort of creative thinkers that think beyond the syllabus to get a deeper understanding of what they're studying. And if you teach civil rights, you'll be aware that that incredible photo of Elizabeth Eckford and going into Little Rock High School on her own when they started busing 9 students in. And Elizabeth Eckford is the one sitting down in that photo. In 1957, she was the only one of the 9 students who were going into start their first day in a white school who didn't have a phone. So no one was able to contact her to tell her we're all going together, we're going to meet at point X. So Elizabeth Eckford just turned up at school and was submitted to such vitriol. And in 2017, Paul McCartney's tour, he introduced Blackbird on stage and said, oh, this was our civil rights song. We'd seen things like Little Rock, and this was our message to Black Americans that, we're with you. And in 2016, he said that at a concert at Little Rock and met two of the Little Rock Nine, including Elizabeth Eckford. And there's a syllabus point on civil rights that talks about the impact of civil rights around the world. That photo tells more than, an hour of reading about the impact of civil rights movement around the world. And by the time they hit year 12, students are going to be used to thinking about what a photo can tell them, how you use different sources. And that's really been, I guess, what's inspired us to write what we're trying to do and prepare students that can feel comfortable and happy in senior history. And as history students, we know we like students to go from 10 into 11 and 12 history. And this book, the books I'm hoping really prepare them for that and make them think history is a good option to help me understand who I am, where I am, and what this is all about. In a world that seems chaotic, history is helping me understand my place. So that's the end result. Students who are better prepared for success in HSC history. And most importantly, and I think this is the gift we give to our students as history teachers, that we produce students who think for themselves, have the skills and conceptual understanding to interpret their world and negotiate the future based on their understanding of the past. And if we can do that for them, we're really, I think, doing a great thing for society. And I think, you should feel very proud of being a history teacher, knowing that that's what you're doing for your students. So that's it from me. I hope that's given you some understanding of what goes into creating a new edition, and particularly in such a complex year as 2020. So I'd like to hand over now to Callie, who will talk about how to use how to get the books and all those sort of things I know nothing about.
Hello everyone, thank you Bernie. This is Callie speaking. I'll now provide a short overview of the new editions of Insight History New South Wales. And firstly, it's important to explain how we're publishing these new editions. Last year, while canvassing teachers at conferences, during meetings and using online surveys, we asked, would you prefer year-level books or staged books? And the response was so evenly split that we really couldn't decide one option over the other. So we've decided to publish both options and provide you, our customers, with the choice to best suit the way teaching history is delivered across New South Wales schools. Therefore, we present the 6 new covers, publishing by year 7 to 10, as well as at stage 4 and stage 5. So this means one book for stage 4 and one book for stage 5, rather than a pack containing 2 separate books. Well, I hope you're as excited as we are about this. So how are they different? The year-level books include complete coverage of all depth study options, in print as well as digitally, with one exception, which is the new chapter in the Year 10 book on the Holocaust, chapter 12 there. The stage books include the same chapters as the yearbooks, but in the stage books, some chapters are digital only, available via OBook. In the stage 4 book, there are 6 online only chapters, including ancient Greece, ancient India, Renaissance Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and so on. In the stage 5 book, there are 4 online chapters, including the aforementioned chapter on the Holocaust. Hopefully this is clear, but if not, please pop your question into the chat box. So let's look inside Chapter 2, Ancient Egypt. The chapter opener clearly lists what's covered, based around those key inquiry questions, and the syllabus dot points. Includes the case study, a case study in each chapter, and concludes with the checkpoint summative questions and activities. Content is presented in a clear, clean layout against a white background, starting with the syllabus dot points for the topic. These also serve as learning intentions for the topic. Spotlight on the left-hand side, as Bernie has said, highlights skills and concepts and links them to specific content. Glossary terms in the margin to support students at the point of learning. And the new edition includes the addition of visible thinking prompts, helping students to develop a culture of critical thinking and improve analysis skills. Central to Insight History is the emphasis on good source study. Interpret questions develop student source analysis skills. Importantly, students are asked not only to think about what a source reveals, but also what it doesn't reveal. We want students to be able to think like historians. Each spread concludes with a range of check your learning questions to cater for differing levels of ability and learning styles. Go deeper activities provide for extension, helping teachers with individualised and differentiated learning. At the end of the chapter are the checkpoint activities, which are linked directly to the syllabus outcomes. Some of you will be familiar with checkpoint, and this time we've tidied up the marking scheme and we've added a marking guide to help. Further, in the teacher resource online, you'll find differentiated quizzes and checkpoint worksheets at 3 levels. A little bit more on those shortly. I've mentioned there's a case study for each chapter, allowing students to connect more deeply with some of the intriguing aspects and big issues in the topics they're studying. For example, in ancient Rome, this is a double-page case study on Hannibal. So let's just talk now about you having a look at the new content. So we do have sample content available. Chapters from Year 7, Stage 4 and Year 9, Stage 5 are now available to view via our website, and we also have a digital sample of the teacher dashboard available from the website as well. The sales team also has limited quantities of printed chapter samples, and full-page proofs are available very shortly and can be requested. Our details will be available at the end of this webinar. Oxford's online digital books we call OBook. The interface for the new edition is quite a change from the current edition, but those of you using our Stage 6 Key Features of Modern History, Antiquity, or indeed Insight Geography will recognise the layout. The online page matches the printed page, and the page numbers align, making it easier to transition between the two formats. Supported by a wealth of additional teaching and learning support material, the colour-coded tiles, you can see there on the screen, represent the types of resources. So the mustard-coloured teaching programs, pink web links, there are worksheets, and so on. As I mentioned, to support the checkpoint activities, we provide differentiated worksheets at 3 levels, which can be downloaded, printed, as well as assigned to students via the platform. There are also differentiated multiple choice assessed quizzes to use online with students. There's a teacher version of the OBook, which includes, well, lots of time-saving material such as a teaching program and answers to the student book questions, answers to the worksheets, answers to the rich tasks, and as well as web links and more. There are two new digital features for this new edition, Quizlet and Markbook. Oxford has partnered with Quizlet to engage students in the online space with learning tools and games. And Markbook helps you monitor progress as well as save you some time. Each chapter is supported with auto-marked quizzes that assess students' level of understanding, monitor progress and track engagement. Teachers can filter results by class or individual students. And you can also add the results of your own school-developed assessments to complete your Markbook. We'll have a look now at some of the pricing. So we'll run through that. So your printed book with a digital access code for the stage books, $94.95. It is possible to buy a digital copy only for a student. That is a single user use, which would appear typically in a book list situation at $74.95. The multi is a multi-year institutional purchase. It's a cost-effective solution suitable for schools preferring digital resources only, that is to say no hard copy, wanting access for every student without the recurring annual costs. So it's ideal in a book hire situation. The Stage Multi provides 3 lots of 2 years of access. So provided to students at Year 7 in 2021, those students would retain their copy until they finish history in Year 8, and then it could be assigned to a new Year 7 cohort. The teacher resources can be purchased, but we do provide those free of charge with adoption, which means putting it onto your book list or purchasing class sets, for example. And for the year level books, it's $64.95 for a hard copy and digital access code. The year level books provide 12 months of digital access, and so the multi there is 3 lots of 12 months of access. Hopefully that makes sense, but we would certainly welcome your questions, and we are available to discuss the details of the pricing with you at any time. And with that, I will hand back to Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. We have some really great questions here. So, Bernie, they are for you. So the first one is, will there be any reference to fake news and the use of propaganda in the 21st century?
It underpins a couple. I can remember writing that term fake news and feeling very uncomfortable with thinking it's got to be there. Now, somewhere in Year 10, I have written so many things recently, and I'm just going through page proofs. I can't give you the exact place where it is, but certainly I know fake news gets mentioned. And it's to do with contestability. Oh, there was something with Hitler, and Hitler saying that, you know, Germany didn't lose World War One, and linking that to this idea where politicians can say anything, but things aren't true. So yes, that's definitely in there. I think it was in the war in Year 9. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bernie. A question from John. How focused should we be on Stage 6 as part of the continuum of learning in history? Would it be appropriate to begin to focus on those higher order skills when students enter Stage 4 as opposed to Stage 5 as opposed to Stage 4, when they might be intimidated rather than stimulated by the challenge?
So I think what we've tried to do with particularly even just those little spotlights is getting kids thinking about them. You obviously work to the level of your kids and then develop as they become more comfortable and confident. Certainly I think they should notice a step up from when they hit Stage 5, just as they will in Stage 6. I think what we've tried to do, even with the questioning, and these are some of the things, I'm not pushing this, but the next webinar is unpacking that in a little bit more detail with more elaborate examples from the case studies and things. But what we've really tried to do is keep kids comfortable as they work through what the syllabus tells them they've got to look at, whilst almost sometimes I think it's unbeknownst to the kids. They don't realise till they get through the end of it, wow, I know how to do that. And I guess more than anything, it's arriving in stage 6 comfortable and not intimidated that this is going to be too hard, but with a confidence, if I keep developing and working, I'll be able to do this. And it's through the highlights and the spotlights, the style of questioning and the different types of questioning, so that there are, there are creative activities in there that will get them to think about things while they're enjoying themselves. And I make no apology for wanting kids to enjoy themselves while they do history. So my hope would be that that comes quite naturally, but there is a step up between stage 4 and stage 5 that would help prepare them for what they encounter in stage 6, if that answers that, I hope.
Thanks, Bernie. Another question from Alex Neve. She says, some students struggle to see the relevance of ancient history by the time they get to year 10, as it's been a few years since they've studied ancient history. Have you got any suggestions on how to sustain their interest in ancient history throughout the junior years?
That's a really good question, Alex, and hello, how are you? Lovely to hear from you. She was an outstanding student at uni, I can tell everybody. As a head teacher, that always worried me, and particularly at my last school, ancient history, I had a long discussion with the boss because students loved ancient history because they did it in year 7 and they thought it was such fun and it was so interesting. And then, so we picked up lots of less able kids wanting to do it, and he had to understand, which he did, that some of those students wouldn't be getting band 6s, but they would be really enjoying history. And I think because the syllabus takes you right away from ancient history, but it doesn't take you away from the skills and the enjoyment that you found in ancient history. So I think part of what is doing is finding reference points in the ancient world that you use and say, remember when we did this? Remember, how, Hannibal was surrounded and, had to take his elephants over the Alps. Well, that applies in this sort of situation where we've got a strategist in World War II, linking up those sort of things and keeping the memory of what a good thing ancient history was in year 7 alive and linking it to their understanding of the skills and concepts so that they understand that even though they're doing, the environment or, Indigenous Australians, they're using the same skills, and so it will be okay to jump back into ancient history because those skill base will apply to them. I hope that helps you, Alex.
Thanks, Bernie. Another question from John. Does the Making a Nation chapter in Year 9 address the history of the first Australians before settlement?
It's mentioned in there. It's particularly trying to get students to think about what's been written in the past. It's not in the detail because the syllabus doesn't allow for that detail, but it recognises that we're now reconstructing our understanding of history, of pre-colonial history. And in doing that, by looking at the work of Gamage and Pascoe and people like that, and putting that there as something that can be unpacked in the classroom, it's giving, I think, teachers the opportunity to explore that and empower their students to challenge what they may have heard. And that's, I guess, what could be very powerful when kids start finding those things out for themselves. And if this does become the debate it's threatening to be in Australian history, I think they'll be very well prepared to understand what's being debated and develop opinions based on strong historical understanding and evidence rather than just throwing around ideas they've heard.
Okay, thanks very much, Bernie. That looks like that's all the questions for now. So I'd just like to thank Bernie and Kelly for a really interesting session. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. If you'd like to learn more about the new edition of Inside History or arrange to see full sample pages, you can contact your local secondary education consultant, Kath Stevenson, Kelly James or Sandra McLaughlin. Thank you all for coming and have a lovely evening.